Welcome to the Vancouver Maritime Museum. My name is Craig Beattie and I'm the president of the Maritime Museum Society. Today we are opening a very special exhibit. It's our celebration of the 100th anniversary of Roald Amundson's voyage through the Northwest Passage, one of the truly great events of the 20th century. It's particularly special to us here at the museum because of the St Roch behind me. The St Roch was an RCMP vessel that also traveled through the Northwest Passage, not once, but twice in 1942, and it was captained by another Norwegian, Henry Larson. On our left here is the St Roch. What has always surprised me about the St Roch is how such a tiny vessel became so important in our country's history and indeed in navigation. Not only did the St Roch go through the Northwest Passage twice, but it was also the first ship to completely circumnavigate the North American continent. It did this during the wartime, the Second World War, as an RCMP schooner. As we walk along here beside the St Roch, we have some of the really interesting artifacts that the museum has obtained from northern Canada. What we have on the right over here are a number of pieces of art from the Arctic donated to the Vancouver Maritime Museum by Arthur Lang, a very well-known politician in Canada. Arthur Lang was a great contributor to both the museum and the country in his work as a Canadian statesman. One of the things that we're particularly proud of at the Vancouver Maritime Museum is Arctic exploration and the Arctic explorers who have made so much difference to our country. These days we're thinking of the North more and more because of climate change and the clearing of ice in the Arctic Ocean. But in fact, the Arctic has obsessed explorers for well over 150 years. We're particularly proud of our associations with Henry Larson, the captain of the St Roch, and with the Norwegian community here in Vancouver. Henry Larson was a Norwegian immigrant to Canada and was intensely interested both in Arctic exploration and the RCMP as an RCMP officer on board the St Roch working in the Arctic. In this corner beside me here, we celebrate another great Arctic explorer, and in fact it's Roald Amundsen, the explorer we're celebrating in this evening's reception. Roald Amundsen was one of the great explorers of his day, and I would liken him in many ways to a man with the prestige that an astronaut would have today. Roald Amundsen not only went through the Northwest Passage, but he conquered Antarctica as well and was the first to reach the South Pole. He did so at the very turn of the 20th century in one of the greatest expeditions that has been known in Arctic and Antarctic exploration. His ship was a tiny little one called the Joa, which is now housed in Oslo, Norway, with another Arctic exploratory ship, the Fram. With the three ships, the St Roch, the Fram, and the Joa, people are now able to have access to three of the most important vessels in Arctic exploration ever.
Hi, I'm Phoenix and I'm from Sustainable Television. I'm here with Craig Emerson, and we are in the forecastle of St Roch.
Here at the Maritime Museum?
Yes.
And it's very interesting. It's very compact. You've got very cramped sleeping quarters here, 8 bunks in very close proximity, and And right at the bow too, so at the beginning and the end of the voyage going through the Northwest Passage, when you might be in some rougher Pacific or Atlantic seas,
they would feel it first.
This would be getting all of the impact of the rough North Seas.
I see.
So you have to be a very brave seaman to undertake this type of voyage.
Or have a really strong stomach. So I hear that you're related to Lord Emerson. What is your relation to him?
Yes, he was a cousin of my grandfather. I believe specifically I'm a second cousin once or twice removed, but it's always been a great fascination for me to have a world-famous polar explorer in our family history, and many times I've been approached by people when they've heard my name just to ask and to try and understand what part of me is part of his history.
And how would you respond to them? What would your answer be?
Well, we've got a great story in how we came to Vancouver. My grandfather, as a young Norwegian merchant Navy man, was working on freighters, and he was on a freighter off of the coast of Tahiti, and his ship ran aground and sank. And all hands escaped and everyone survived, and he was making his way back to Norway, came up the Pacific coast through Vancouver, met and fell in love here and stayed, and that's how my family came to be here. And now there's several generations of younger and older Amundsen's and Robinsons and Bellangers. The names have spread apart.
I see. What did you think made Amundsen decide to interact and communicate with the Inuits? Because I felt like he was, I guess, a forefront in understanding that that interaction was crucial to their survival. And
I think it might have had something to do with his Norwegian heritage or his Norwegian upbringing, but he had a basic level of respect for the people who made their living in very difficult climates, and he chose to learn from them, and that helped him in his explorations.
Okay. What were some of the knowledge and the skills that they passed on to him?
Certainly his clothing. If you ever look at the clothing, he took on the various skins and used their sled dogs and many other things. I mean, from his Norwegian background, he took his skiing, and that allowed him and his men to travel further and faster, and studied the local people, how they survived, incorporated those techniques to make sure that his exploration team was safe and secure and had enough resources to get there and back. And he was a brilliant scientific mind, and that's why he was successful.
Fittingly, the Larson statue is on on the bow of the St Roch. And that bronze statue was provided to the museum by contributions from the Norwegian community here in Vancouver. It's one of the pieces we're particularly happy with. Very fitting memorial to a man who, in retrospect, I guess, was both a great Norwegian and a great Canadian. One of the things that's made me particularly happy about the way the St Roch is displayed here in Vancouver is that it's possible for people to get on board the ship and go through practically every inch of the ship. I get tremendous pleasure seeing children going through the wheelhouse, tugging at the sails and playing with the polar bear skins on the deck and with the equipment that Henry Larson's own crew used on their voyages. It gives people a connection to history that you just can't get any other way. Let's go this way and I'll show you some more of the Vancouver Maritime Museum. We're moving now through our lobby towards the TK Gallery, where we have our rolled Amundsen exhibit. But on the way, perhaps I could show you a couple of things that are very special to us. Perhaps here we could just stop for a moment, because I'd like to show you Arnold 176. Arnold 176 is the chronometer that was used by Captain George Vancouver in his voyages along the coast. Chronometers were extremely important because it was only with chronometers, that is by knowing the time very accurately, that sailors could determine exactly where they were. And it was by having tremendously accurate mechanical clocks that the charts of the Pacific Ocean, and the charts of the west coast were generated. And in fact, if you look beyond me, just over to the display here, you see an excellent example of the kind of charting that was done in the Strait of Juan de Fuca as far back as the late 18th century, and to some extent even earlier than that. The early explorers were astonishingly careful and accurate about their measurements. When you look at a chart like this today, you can identify practically everything that we would recognize now in the lower part of the BC coast. It's quite amazing to see some of these old charts of this area. We are celebrating the 100th anniversary of Roald Amundson's trips through the Northwest Passage here in Canada, but also celebrating his tremendous contributions to Antarctic exploration as well. As you may know, Roald Amundsen was the first explorer to make it to the South Pole in 1911. The Norwegians had a very different approach to Arctic and Antarctic exploration than people from some other countries. One of the things that was most extraordinary about Roald Amundsen's style was that he learned tremendously from the people he met. He had great respect for the Inuit people, spent a lot of time with them. In fact, he actually spent several winters with the Inuit people in northern Canada and became a master of the same techniques that they had used to do so well in our north. Survival in the Arctic is not a trivial thing, and for Arctic exploration, and in fact for Antarctic exploration as well, those survival skills became essential. This really became obvious when Roald Amundsen visited the Antarctic in 1911 and found himself in a race for the South Pole with Robert Scott, the British explorer. Scott had taken a very highly mechanized approach to reaching the South Pole with Caterpillar tractors, a lot of mechanized machinery, a very expensive and elaborate expedition. Amundsen, on the other hand, drew from his experience in northern Canada, relied on dogs, relied on sleds, and relied on the skills that he had learned when he was doing his Northwest Passage exploration just a few years earlier. The result we all know. Amundsen made it to the South Pole first and back again with his entire crew in good order. Scott was not so lucky. He made it to the South Pole after Amundsen, but in fact died very tragically with most of his crew on the way back to the coast. It was not a happy time for the British, certainly, but it represented a tremendous achievement, and in fact was really the last great frontier in exploration. It's hard these days for us to realize just how important polar exploration was in the late 19th and early 20th century. It truly was like us going to the moon.
My name is Ilse Beert-Eikeland. I'm the Norwegian ambassador to Canada, and I'm watching Sustainability TV.